For the Investing News Network, I am Brian McGovern, and joining me today is Steve Hawkins, President and CEO of Horizons ETFs. Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, Brian. Thank you very much for having me here today.
We're going to be talking about psychedelic investments. Horizons ETFs launched earlier this year, the first psychedelics ETF, which trades on the New York Exchange under the ticker symbol PSYK. Tell me about the inception of the fund and sort of what drove the need for Horizons to launch this ETF.
Hey, Brian. Well, I mean, Horizons ETFs really likes to be innovative when it comes to new products, new asset classes, up-and-coming technologies. And we've been looking at the psychedelic space for a better part of a year. We saw the capital markets start to mature last year. More public companies came into the realm of investors. And then we saw a huge sort of self-directed end retail investor following of psychedelics and psychedelic companies, primarily in the early stages. But as these companies were started to progress, some of them started to get pretty big pretty quickly. And, it was for us, it was very much like, 2017 and sort of watching all of the sort of end marijuana investors really wanting to get into this space and being very excited about things to come with the potential of this industry. So, really based on a lot of sort of investor feedback and the growth and the potential growth of this sector, we thought it was very important to bring a psychedelics ETF to Canada and to the world.
I see. I'm curious if you can expand about the comparisons with the cannabis space. The cannabis stock market has seen a lot of volatility, very incredible highs, a lot of depressing lows. Psychedelics touts itself as an industry that pursues a similar model to the biotech or to the pharma industry, which is a long-term development. Volatility can apply there, but usually that's not what we see in the sector it tries to resemble. How do you see the long-term outlook for this space and given those comparisons with cannabis?
Well, I mean, for us, they're really two very different value propositions. I mean, one, cannabis is really targeting the sort of the recreational market and taking over from the illicit drug market that is very prevalent in North America and around the world. And, the marijuana companies really, they were able to come public, they were access the capital markets to bring in new funds, create stores, creating, legalized growth projects. That part of it is a little bit the same from, the legality of the underlying product itself. So here we have psychedelics now. And, when my comparison back to the marijuana industry, it's really about the new up and coming capital markets availability for this sector. So now that there are a lot of legal doors open for the psychedelic companies themselves, for them to be able to create drugs, to go through the formal FDA and Health Canada testing processes to create a prescribed drug that a doctor will give you per se to manage one of many different potential mental illnesses and afflictions. This is where we see the excitement. And to your point, this is a biotech, more like a biotech company than a recreational drug company. I mean, all of the companies that we're really invested in are really, going through the formal processes of creating legal drugs that will be legally available to be prescribed by a doctor and more formally introduced like any other sort of doctor that any other drug that you go to for a doctor. So it's really, but the psychedelics themselves, we are looking at the real life avenue, so the legalized avenue for psychedelics themselves rather than the recreational applications for the psychedelics. And that's really the big difference here between marijuana and psychedelics. But the fact that these are still, there's not many psychedelics public companies, or the ones that are there are still pretty small. So that's really how this compares back to the sort of marijuana industry and back in 2016 and early 2017, before there's this huge influx of new cannabis companies out there. We see a lot of new psychedelics companies coming online almost every single day. There's a new IPO, there's a new psychedelics company that is coming out there. And that's where we see this really potential growth of this industry. It's pretty small right now. To your point, it's very, very volatile, but that's really something that you get when you're getting into a very new, novel asset class like psychedelics. It's very, very specific. And one small piece of news really can change the whole industry. There's a waterfall effect from one company on to the others. If one company gets a drug approved, that can have a very, very positive effect on the entire industry. I mean, we saw MindMed get a listing on the NASDAQ stock exchange a couple of weeks ago, and the entire psychedelics industry got a huge lift from that one stock that was up over 50%. Now that it was able to access the U.S. capital markets by being listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. So, most of the companies are still relatively focused on the Canadian capital marketplace, but we'll see more and more companies access the overall North American capital markets, and that's through getting listings on U.S. stock exchanges.
I see. Since you mentioned there's been quite a barrage of new companies going public, and all the indications seems to point that there will be more and more companies hitting the public markets, do you worry there could be a oversaturation for this space as in its early days?
I think that will absolutely be the case. It really depends on the novelty of the underlying technology that the company is trying to bring to marketplace, the science that they're doing, the delivery mechanisms that they're using with respect to those underlying molecules, and what actually drug they're focused on, or mental illness they're focused on with respect to their drugs. I mean, we've got companies like MindMed, Cybin, Celos, Compass. These are all companies that are, in the sort of billion-dollar market cap range, and they're all doing very different things generally. But then you have a lot of small companies, and like you said, and with respect to the new companies, there's a lot of very small, like micro cap companies coming online right now doing IPOs. Some of those are people just trying to, get rich quick, and you really have to do some in-depth review of those underlying companies, what the science is that they're trying to bring forward, the real prospects for that science themselves. Will they be able to make it to the end of getting, FDA approval or Health Canada approval? There's a lot of rigors which go into the legitimacy of getting a drug approved. And it's a process that takes years, through phase 1, through phase 2, phase 2B, phase 3, full, applications to the governments, and then dealing with all of the trial science and things like that. And there's not a lot of companies that really have that wherewithal to go through that whole process. So you have to be very careful when you're investing in one individual company. And that's one of the reasons exactly why we brought an ETF to the marketplace. I mean, we do a fair bit of that in-depth review ourselves to make sure that the company is really active in this space. We look at the capital markets activity in these companies themselves, but we have a diversified portfolio of psychedelics companies, also rounded out with a couple of different big pharma companies in there that are in the psychedelic space itself. Like, I mean, we have Johnson & Johnson, we have AbbVie, which are both active in the psychedelic space. I mean, Johnson & Johnson has the first, ketamine-based nasal spray. So first real psychedelic drug approved by the FDA for distribution to the public. And that nasal spray, Spravato, was really the first of its kind. And we see, AbbVie very, very active in the space, trying to get approval on a few different drugs. And then you see all of these companies with the new science and things like that, the new IPOs. I mean, a lot of these companies don't have the ability, without significant capital market influx of cash, to be able to make it through that whole process. We might see them selling their science out early, from the micro caps to the mid caps to the larger caps, to ultimately to big pharma. at the end of the day. There is a big process here, and there will be a lot of companies which don't make it in the end, but it's still very, very early stage in this sector itself. And there's huge growth prospects. I mean, we have over 700 million people in the world which are suffering from some sort of mental illness, be it addiction or depression. There's just so many endless possibilities for psychedelics right now when it comes to psilocybin and MDMA and microdosing of LSD. It's very exciting from a science perspective to watch.
I see. Now that there's been some time from the fund's inception and first day trading, have you seen any initial takeaways from the performance of the fund up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, we saw there was a lot of investor interest in getting into this sector pretty early, and investing in the ETF in the early stages does sort of create a self-fulfilling um, uh, result, because that money is a big influx into psychedelic companies generally. That money from us is being invested directly into these psychedelics companies. We're going out there and buying the stock in the marketplace to invest in the ETF. So we're basically a fixed buyer into the marketplace, and that was helping boost some of the prices. As we've seen a slowdown of money coming into the fund, there's been a lot more market volatility as well over the last few months. We have seen sort of volumes go down pretty significantly, and that includes volume coming into the ETF. We still see a nice trickle of money coming in, but that is not enough to sort of like skyrocket this sector itself. And in the fall, we saw a huge influx of money coming into marijuana companies, and the companies themselves just completely took off. And that was like the best performing sector in Q4 of 2020. Here, psychedelics really took off, that they plateaued. They've come off a little bit with trading volume, but they're pretty steady in a range. And then we saw this MindMed news, and that stock, jumped 50% in one day. And I think there's going to be a lot of positive news stories that will come behind. I mean, you asked me, my long-term predictions of this industry. I mean, as soon as one or two drugs really get approved, and that could be a year or 2 years down the road, I think we're going to see huge growth from this industry. Right now, I mean, I think it's really, there's a lot of these companies are positioning themselves right now with the right science, with the right partners to develop these drugs and to move their businesses forward. And those partnerships are very, very important on the sort of the lifespan of the underlying science itself. And, it's not going to take a lot to see sort of a huge jump in this industry. So it's really sort of a watch and see. But, to your point, it's very volatile. It's very, very early in this asset class itself. And these companies are not really, revenue generating positive companies at this stage. And as soon as we start to see that change a little bit, like we did with the cannabis industry, I mean, it took, over 2.5 years for after Canopy was public to sort of earn a profit, or Afri or Aurora. And now you're seeing huge different capital markets activities on these companies. But, I mean, at one point in 2018, like Canopy Growth had a bigger market cap than National Bank and CIBC, which is, unbelievable when you think about it. Here we have Compass Pathways, and we have MindMed, which have, well over $1 billion market caps now, and they're still very involved in the science space, but they're not revenue positive generating companies, kind of thing. So, there's lots of wait and see to see what's going to happen with this. And I mean, we're still very excited about what psychedelics the effect that it can have on our entire social ecosystem with respect to curing people or helping people with their mental illnesses. I mean, there's just so many exciting things that can come from that, and benefits to our society generally.
I see. Definitely a lot of wait and see, and we'll be excited to watch as it happens. Steve, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Brian, thank you very much for having me, and good luck with the article, and let's have some fun.
For the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for a lot more interviews. We'll see you next time.